Me. We're going to talk about DB2 12. So this is a short 1 hour, highlight. So what's DB2 doing and what do we care about and what are the things that you should care about? I just spent yesterday with a customer in the area doing the one-day version of what's DB2 12. So I've got a thing about that at the end in case you need to do any of that. So first question, how many of you already have a plan relative to DB2 12? All right. And how many of you have already downloaded code? A couple have downloaded code. Okay. Anybody in production? Oh, really? All right. Well, then you can give the presentation. All right. So this is the abstract. Just lifted it from the abstract. Of course, everything in here is as good as it is today. But if we come out with fixes tomorrow, then something I say may be wrong, right? And performance numbers are all based on what we've measured and what customers have measured, and they'll be different in your shop. So quickly, what is the DB2 strategy in which version 12 is going to fit? And what we're really doing is we're looking at these four major thrusts, right? We've got smarter analytics, so working with things like the accelerator to make hybrid transaction and analytic processing, working with machine learning and artificial intelligence, expanding our SQL support, simplifying things. One of the reasons we want to simplify things is because there's more and more work we need to do, and there's fewer and fewer of us doing it, right? So we need a lot of simplification there. On the one hand, because there's fewer people who are doing our jobs, and on the other hand, because we want to be able to handle all these new apps that are coming out there on these new platforms, like my phone that's hiding over here. And I want to be able to use that phone to get at my DB2 data, and I need a very simple access because my phone isn't robust, right? It has a few things, and my fingers are really fat, so I only have a couple buttons, right? So I need to be able to handle that stuff in a simple fashion. Always on, DB2 and the parallel sysplex have been the basis for continuous operations, high availability, and therefore continuous availability for relational data for years. It's the gold standard, and we want to keep making it even more so. And so the things we're looking at there include non-disruptive schema changes, right? If you can make changes to your database design, to your tables and your columns without causing application changes, without invalidating packages, that sort of thing, we want to keep doing that. And then, of course, take advantage of what's coming in the Z platform. There's a number of things we'll talk about specifically. Some of these things are happening now. Some will be happening in the future, but already version 12 takes advantage of some additional compression. Faster I/O is on the way. Part 1 is available. Part 2 is coming. Doing a lot with in-memory. You may recall that in version 10 and 11, someone like me would stand up here and say you get 5 to 10% CPU drop in your existing workload just by going to the new release, well, and rebinding. We're not advertising 5 to 10% CPU of all of your workload just by rebinding, right? Now to get additional benefits, you have to take advantage of in-memory techniques. So there's a bunch of in-memory techniques in version 12, and we're looking at doing more of that going forward. Okay. So it's no longer on the slide. This is fascinating. When in doubt, hit escape. Is that the next slide? It just won't go backwards. That's it. Fascinating. Oh, yep, now it's going forward. Okay. It resolved itself. Maybe. Weird. Okay. I can't go backwards. So hopefully I didn't skip anything. We announced version 12 in October of 16. I was part of the early support programs. I worked with a number of the customers in the US and other parts of the world that got the code in early and wrestled with the code and made sure that it was ready to be delivered to everyone. And when we announced it, we talked about some of the major highlights, right? Scale and speed, so the ability to massively increase the number of inserts per second that DB2 would support. We talked about having much larger objects, right? So we can have up to 280 trillion rows with the new UTS tablespaces. We talked about in-memory techniques, which are already referred to, doing a lot more in analytics. So depending on the workloads, there's a lot of work we did in the query and analytics space. And then of course, we also made some improvements for JSON to handle the web and cloud access. And then managing and availability. So a number of things to make it easier either for the newer members of the workforce or for those of us to be more productive. And we're going to talk about several of these as we go forward. The other thing that's interesting about version 12 is it's the starting point for DB2's journey into continuous delivery. So all of the subsystems in z/OS are doing continuous delivery. They're doing them in slightly different ways. And this is the first step for DB2 doing continuous delivery going forward. It's just not moving. My notes is active, but the picture isn't. So maybe if I close a window, that'll help. All right, let's see if we can go forward now. All right. One of the things where, one of those strategy points where DB2 12 is starting to play a role in is we need to be able to help development, application development be faster, right? DB2 as part of central IT cannot be an obstacle to what's going on. So what we're doing is we want DB2 to be a better player in DevOps, and we've got a lot going on in that space. One of the issues is that what actually is happening on the mainframe, including DB2 related apps, are running a good part of our economy, right? Last share, one of the keynote speakers described an event that he was at where one of the younger members of the audience came and asked him, why does the mainframe even matter? And then he asked this person, who do you work for? And it was one of the brand new companies, I won't name names. And the speaker said, well, you know what? If your company goes out of business tomorrow, everyone will have a new solution by Monday. And if the mainframe goes out of business, if our mainframe apps stopped working, banks would stop working, airplanes wouldn't fly. I mean, it would be a disaster. So it's critical. But new apps are coming out all the time. We want to be able to enable them. So we've got a whole bunch that we're doing here with DevOps and coordinating all of these things into what's happening in DB2. So there's stuff out there today that we're going to talk about later on and new things coming down the road, including the ability to have DB2 data available in the IBM Cloud Private space. One of the ways we're doing this is in data as a service. We can take existing DB2 data, which will be represented by an SQL statement, right? They'll get that data out, or data that you can put together based on the results of a stored procedure and take either that statement or that stored procedure and expose it as a service that a mobile app can call. We can do that directly. We don't need DB2 Connect, right? We do need to have authority and everything like that. But I can then go out here and I can have apps out here on tablets or iPhones or Androids or even desktops, and I can have them come in through the cloud, and I can have them come natively into DB2, or I can have them go through z/OS Connect EE and get at that SQL statement or that stored procedure. It's really simple. Okay, so let's talk about actual DB2 12 for a while. I talked about in-memory optimization. The first thing we're going to talk about is a fast traverse block for indexes. Typically, you think about, in a reasonably sized table might have an index with 5 levels, right? pretty good big table. We've got the root page, several non-leaf pages, the leaf page, and the data page. And in a 5-level index, the odds are you're going to end up doing 6 get pages and probably 2 IOs, one for the leaf page, one for the data, before you get your row back if you're going random processing through the index. We have a number of techniques in the index manager to make things better when you're doing sequential processing, right? You can slide through the leaf pages in the index and save a bunch of access. You're not doing get pages. But we haven't enabled any of these new technologies for random access, and random still drives a lot of our workload. So the idea behind a fast reverse block is to take the non-leaf layers of the index, put them in a special memory buffer in a way that DB2 doesn't have to do a get page to go find the page because it knows where it is. It can traverse right through the root and the non-leaf pages, so you end up with a get page for the leaf page and a get page for the data. So fewer get pages per SQL is going to mean CPU savings. DB2 does this automatically when you bring a version 12. You don't even have to tune it if you don't want to, if you have enough resource. Now, if you do want to tune it, right, you can do display stats to see what's going on. You can populate a table to say when DB2 should and when DB2 shouldn't do this, and you can track it with various IFC IDs to see how it's behaving. But it comes on by default. It will use extra storage, right? We're talking about exploiting real memory to get CPU savings. And DB2 will not do this if your system is paging, right? So if DB2 detects paging, it won't allow this to happen because paging is the antithesis of lots of real storage. So here are some numbers, and some of these numbers came out of the early support program. So we see a 5-level index where they're getting 23% CPU improvement for online transaction processing. We're basically talking random access through an index, and we get 23% CPU reduction where we have a 5-level index. So that's pretty substantial. I talked about lots of inserts. So this 11.7 million inserts per second is based on a simulated stock exchange transaction that we ran. This is all the details about how it's broken down, but there's a major disclaimer here. This is a table with no index. How many of you have a production table that you're inserted into that does not have an index? Show of hands. Yep, I didn't think so. So that proves it can be done. Once you put an index on it, it drops down to about 5 million inserts per second, but that's still pretty substantial, right? This particular insert algorithm is based on avoiding the bottleneck representing space search. So if you're colliding on the space map page or colliding on the page that the threads are being pointed to, this will solve that problem, right? If the problem with your insert rate is that you have 93 indexes on the table, this isn't going to solve the problem, okay? There's a team at the lab that works on query results. I usually call them the optimizer team, but there's a lot more than optimizer that goes into handling queries, right? Optimizer and access path calculation is part of it, but then doing what I call the blocking and tackling, dealing with sort work and dealing with sparse indexing and whatnot are all included in there. And they did a lot of work up to the delivery of version 12 to handle a wide variety of query workloads, because the workloads that really trouble customers tend to be the query workloads, right? We've had years and years to tune online transactions down pretty tight. And with the index fast reverse block, we can even affect that a little bit. But queries are growing exponentially, and more queries are being written with the assistance of tools that then produce SQL behind the scenes. And you know what that SQL looks like, right? It takes 2 or 3 or 4 pages, and no human can reasonably parse it. So that's really complex, and we want that stuff to still be able to run. So that's what the optimizer team, I call them that, has been working on. And you can see there's a wide variety of query types over here on the left. And here you can see this is CPU reduction, right? Over 90% CPU reduction for some complex query types. Now, this broad range here looks like ones that might be doing union all or complex UDFs, that sort of thing. And the middle range might be something like complex reporting or large sort. And then the ones at the bottom are the relatively simple queries. You're going to get a little bit of benefit, right? The ones at the top of the chart, You don't get that benefit unless you get a new access path. So when you go to version 12, you really want to look at not using AP reuse, right? Try the new access path, but definitely use plan management, because if one of your queries does get a worse access path, you want to be able to back off to the previous one, right? How many of you are using plan management? All right, let me ask it a different way. How many of you don't know what I mean when I'm talking about plan management? Okay, so in version 9, we introduced a ZPARM called plan management, and DB2 will store as part of the package information about the access path. So when you rebind the package and get a new access path, if you don't like it, you can go back to the old access path because DB2 knows what it was doing then. And I strongly recommend that you implement Plan Management Extended, which says you have 3 copies, the one you're using now, the last one you used, and an original one. And then if you don't like the one you have now, you can switch to either the previous one or the original one and get back to a performance that you're used to. It may not be your best performance, but it's something that you know and can predict. But to get these kind of benefits, you're going to have to go for that new access path, right? And use plan management as your fallback position.
Excuse me, sorry.
Question?
On your previous screen, if you don't mind, I don't know if you can go back or not.
I'm not going to try.
Okay, that's all crashed, we don't want that. But I saw that it stated that those numbers were generated on a single Z13. How do those numbers compare to on a Z14 and or with high availability?
So you're talking about the 5.3 million inserts, that number? Okay, so the Z13, even if it's one box, what we set up is multiple DB2s on multiple LPARs in a data sharing configuration. And they were all slamming rows into the same table. So in a high availability situation, I would have 2 or more Z13s, right, for hardware high availability, but I already have the software high availability because I already have multiple members in my data sharing group. So I could spread those members out across other machines and it's not going to change those numbers. Z14 could potentially be faster, but they didn't have one of those when they ran the numbers. All right, and I didn't actually rephrase the question, but hopefully the people listening to this later will get the idea. So there's additional performance and scalability features in version 12. If you've been using lobs, you know that you can't compress lobs, right? You can compress the table spaces in DB2, and that does a bunch of things for performance as well as disk savings. You can compress indexes in DB2, that just saves disk, doesn't do anything about performance. But you can't compress lobs unless they're inline lobs, you know, within the page. So now we're going to be able to compress lob table spaces. But you can only do that if you have a ZEDC card and the ZEDC compression software. And the ZEDC card and the ZEDC compression software are both chargeable items. And when we do this lob compression, we're actually going to pass the lob from the chip where we're trying to deal with it over to the ZEDC card to do the compression and back. And that process is going to cost a little CPU to do that, right? But depending on how many lobs you have, you can save substantial amounts of disk doing this. Any of you running out of space in your active logs? Today, each active log can be 4 gig minus 1 byte. And some customers have 93 sets of logs that are 4 gig minus 1 byte, and they spin through them in 2 hours. So they cannot match our recommended 6 hours on the active log and 24 hours on disk. So in version 12, we're going to allow you to go up to 768 gigabytes per active log, right? So you can have 93 times 768. 768 gig, by the way, is approximately 2 times 93 times 4 gig. So that's a substantial increase in log capability. We're going to support up to 16 terabytes of buffer pools, but you can't define that because DB2 limits you to 2x the real storage in your environment. But we anticipate that a future piece of hardware and future ZOS will have more than 4 terabytes in the LPAR. So we're already prepared to handle much larger buffer pools. Query parallelism, we used to have an entry fee to go parallel and run on the zip. And once you pay the entry fee, then 4 out of the 5 tasks would be on the zip. Now, no entry fee, all child tasks running on the zip. And then if you're using identity columns, we used to have when you made a change, we had to force a log write in data sharing, which made that expensive, and we don't do that anymore. So dynamic plan stability is a really big feature that the early support customers got really excited about. Here's the concept, right? I've been using dynamic SQL since version 5. And when you're running dynamic SQL, DB2 is going to look at that dynamic SQL, and assuming you've turned on dynamic statement caching, and I hope you all have, then DB2 looks at the statement that that's coming in and says, do I have a match in the dynamic statement cache, right? And it's a character for character match. And if I don't have a match, then I'm going to do a full prepare and put that statement in the cache. And then maybe when the next one comes in, I'll get a match. So if you use parameter markers, you're more likely to get matches, and then all is good. And I go to shops, and I typically see anywhere between 90 and 98% hits in the dynamic statement cache, which is great. So you've got a cache, and it's really effective, and over the weekend, you get a bunch of batch work, and it does some dynamic SQL, and it pushes out all your online dynamic SQL over the weekend, right? It all gets purged. And come Monday morning, the same thing you were running Friday comes in, and it's not in the cache, so it gets a full prepare. But something happened over the weekend, and that full prepare gets a different access path. And maybe it's worse. And then the phone starts to ring. So the idea behind dynamic plan stability is when you have dynamic statement and you know you like the way it's performing now, take that access path and save it in the catalog. So now Monday morning comes along, that statement was purged. When DB2 looks, says, oh, I don't see it in the cache, I don't do a full prepare. I look in the catalog, find the access path I know, and use that instead. Back to short prepare the way I was on Friday. Everything's lovely. So that's the concept. Got a bunch of tables about it, a bunch of commands, a bunch of way to monitor it. That's the ESP customers really liked it, and I think there's going to be a lot of activity in that space. If you load data to DB2 from a client or from your workstation, which some people have that use case, DRDA fast load is a much simpler way. Rather than do a file transfer and then invoke the load utility, you just invoke the load utility and stream it across on a separate socket that runs, where the task is running at the dispatching priority of the DRD address space, or the DIST address space, which is pretty cool. Run stats automation, DB2, when it's going through access path calculation, can identify the run stats that are missing and automatically feed it back into run stats profiles to pick them up the next time. And then a lot of people use resource limit facility or RLF for dynamic SQL. We've extended that to static. But be careful, right? The static you have today, you know how it behaves. This is going to catch new static that hasn't gotten through a review process. But if it's the executive vice president who invoked that package, they probably don't want to be timed out for using too many resources, right? So that's been an interesting one. We're doing a lot with application enablement, and there's a whole bunch of developments in SQL procedure language. So I don't know how many of you use triggers, but there's a lot of enhancements in triggering, including the ability to use different versions and to change the trigger that's in the middle of, say, 3 triggers that fire in a certain order. And now you can change the middle one without having to drop and recreate all 3 triggers. Right? So there's a lot of enhancements there. Arrays and global variables are very exciting. A colleague I work with who's right out of college knows all about arrays and global variables. Very exciting about this because he's been using this stuff when he does coding. I don't have that much experience with it, but it's really exciting. And of course, we're doing things with JSON so that we can, not only are we taking JSON in on our REST calls that I talked about earlier, but we're going to be able, we're handling JSON data within DB2, and we're doing that so you can retrieve the JSON data even faster. A lot of the ESP customers really liked the new merge support. Merge is basically the idea that I've got data that I want to put in, and I don't know if I already have the record or if I don't, right? So should I insert this record, or do I already have most of it and I'm doing an update, right? So some people call it an upsert. And we delivered a limited version of merge back in version 9, and it doesn't quite meet the ANSI standard. This one does. So this one's going to behave like merge on DB2 that you run on Linux or Unix or Windows. And others, it's incredibly powerful. One of the ESP customers did a thorough test of what would it do to do programmatically what it does, right, where your program figures out should I insert or should I update. And then he did the old merge, and then he did the new merge. And he said this thing not only does lots of things that you want it to do, but it performs really, really well. But he said, caution, it's really powerful. So you get your new colleague who's just out of SQL class, doesn't necessarily understand all the ways predicates work, and suddenly is doing a Cartesian join as part of the merge statement. You know, there's no commit scope in the middle of what the merge is doing, so you suddenly merge two really big tables. It's going to run a really long time and eat a lot of CPU. So use with caution, but it's very powerful and it can do a lot of things that you can't do today. There's new syntax for paginating. So if you want to, no one reads the telephone book, but you know the example application where I'm reading through things that look like a telephone book, and I've read through this value, and now I want the values that come next, right? And if it's an analog page, you just do this. But if you're in a program, then it's complicated to figure out what comes next. And so we have two things to support pagination. One is a very simpler way of putting the predicates down there, right? If the thing I got at the bottom was Mary Erickson, I can say where last name greater than Erickson, comma Mary. And that's how I write it, which is much easier for programmers to deal with. The other option is to say, give me 20 pages, give me the next 20 pages, give me the next 20 pages, right? Much simpler syntax and easier to understand. And then I really like this piecewise delete. I've got a table, let's say it's got 10 million rows, and I'm going to get rid of everything that's older than 7 days, right? So I do a delete where older than 7 days, right? That's not hard. And it's going to go through this 10 million row table, and it's going to run for a very long time, and it's going to escalate, and it's going to lock everybody else out, and eventually, hopefully it ends cleanly, right, and gets the commit. And if it doesn't quite end, or something else happens and it blows up, then we get to back everything out, and it's really awful. Piecewise delete says, you can say delete for fetch first only, basically delete the next 5,000, commit. You put it in the commit, we don't. Delete the next 5,000. So you can make it 5,000 or 10,000 or 23,000, whatever number works for you. And so you can go through, and of course, as soon as you committed that delete, those records aren't there anymore. So you just issue the same statement and they'll pick up the next bit that meet that criterion. So that's a lot of folks are really excited about that. Enhancements, if you're using XML, there's a bunch of enhancements for XML. This is just one of them. So you can actually have multiple updates within a single XML modify statement. And anybody using temporal support? We introduced temporal support in version 10 with the idea of system-based time to keep track of the history of a row, you know, in its life in DB2, or business time, which says treat my data differently depending on when it occurs, right? So if anybody using that? Some? Okay. So what we announced in version 10 was inclusive exclusive, which makes sense from a point of view of programming. But when a human just talks about it, inclusive makes a little more sense. My personally favorite example is car insurance premiums, right? When my son was in college, while he was in college, he wasn't driving. I didn't want to pay for an under 25 male driver when he's not driving. When he comes home for the summer and expects to drive cars all over the place, obviously the insurance company is going to ask me to pay a higher premium. So we can set it up to say that my premium goes up between, you know, whenever his semester ends, right, June 1st or whatever it was, to September 1st when he goes back to school. And so you can actually set SQL up to be able to retrieve the data that was active from here to there and then do a query. What was my premium as of this time, right? And we can do all that with bitemporal support. Yes, everybody has solved the problem before programmatically. It's cheaper to do it in the engine, right? So that's the idea. And what we've done here is made it inclusive support, which is a little more intuitive. We've added referential integrity for RI, and we've even set up logical transactions. And that's really too complicated to talk about right now, but that's pretending that a physical transaction is actually made up of several logical transactions, so you can get the history of what happened to the row within one commit scope. Okay, I talked earlier about increasing limits and making tables much, much larger. So if you're not using universal table spaces yet, just another reminder that all the new stuff is coming in universal table spaces. So for universal table space, partition by range, which from now on I'll call UTS-PBR, the new thing is called relative page numbering. And what we're going to do is we're going to increase the number of rows that we can put into one of those tables. So the partition size is going to grow up to 1 terabyte, which means we can have 4 petabytes in a table space, right? So if those are 4K pages, you can have up to 280 trillion rows, right? And then if you did 1,000 inserts per second, that would take 8,800 rows to fill, right? This is Alex Trebek kind of information. What we're doing, though, to make this happen is we're going to take the row number and to find out where the row is relative to the beginning of the partition. Today, it's where the row is relative to the beginning of the table space. And that's why there are 6 pages, and if you remember the old hard copy manuals, there are 6 pages you would have to read through to figure out how much data can I put in this table, because I had to choose, partition size and DS size and all these other things. And now if I'm numbering it from the beginning of the partition, then I can take my partition and I can increase and decrease its size separately. Once I do an online reorg to the PBR RPN, I can then increase DS size without a reorg. This also positions us for future scalability enhancements. So that's very exciting. Insert partition. All right, so we've been able to add a partition at the end for a while. Now, if you find that partition 2 is getting too full and you want to spread stuff out, you can insert a new partition right there in between partition 1 and 2. And then when you do an online reorg, it's just going to move the rows around between those 2 partitions. That's really exciting. More online schema changes. So we don't put indexes and rebuild pending if you do an alter index with compress. There are a bunch of changes you can make to columns that in the past or today, you're going to get immediate package invalidation, right? And the Db2 is going to then know about the new definition, know about the old one, and it's going to be constantly playing this game of trying to keep the columns up to date. Instead, we're going to say you can make this a deferred alter. So you can issue the alter statement on Tuesday, run your reorg on Sunday, no package invalidation, no effect until the online reorg materializes the change. All right, transfer ownership. If you have someone or an ID that owns a bunch of objects and they probably shouldn't own the objects anymore, right? Maybe your auditors aren't happy, or maybe they've left, or my favorite example is that they won the lottery. Right? There are other less fortunate examples that I don't want to think about. So let's think about they won the lottery and they come in on Tuesday and they say, I won the lottery and I'm giving you until Friday. What do you want me to do? So in version 12, you're going to say, I want you to run transfer ownership and I want you to transfer all the objects you own to someone else, right? So that they can own them, or maybe to a functional ID or something. And this is really, really cool, right? So you can move all this stuff over to someone else. And if they come back 6 months later, having spent all of their lottery winnings and not having anything to show for it and want their job back, they're not going to have that ownership anymore, right? It left, and they're going to have to get granted that ownership another way, right? So it's pretty clean, and the auditor is going to be really happy. There is a lot to say in the utilities space, right? So the utilities team has done a bunch of things in version 12. Number one, they have to support all the new features and functions, right? So when I talk about how much bigger UTS PBR RPN is going to be, right? So all the reorg and load, all those utilities have to support bigger and better, right? Plus, all the utilities have to perform better. Plus, people have been asking for additional functional features throughout. So there's a lot of things that are going on here. One of the things we're finding and we're hoping to encourage is to have fewer reorgs for the reason of performance, right? Fewer reorgs to get rid of rows that aren't where you expect them to be, right? And more reorgs for online schema change. And a lot of customers are doing that. They're no longer reorging, every week or every month to get performance back. They're doing it because they're making changes, schema changes, and so they're reorging less frequently. So whether it's for insert partitions or PBR-RPN conversion or deferred column, all of these things, that's where we're going to use those reorgs. We're also making some changes for UTS partition by growth partitions. They've been lagging, right? The PBRs were getting the enhancements first and then the PBGs, so we're catching up with that. And we want to make the utilities more efficient. So several utilities are going to take more advantage of zips. Hopefully you all know how zips work, and hopefully you all have lots of zips, because DB2 wants to use more of them. And using more zips means that you're not contributing to your CPU cost and your rolling 4-hour average, right? All that stuff is going to the zip, so that's really good. If you're in data sharing, you have the opportunity, if you're running run stats or unload, to not register those pages in the group buffer pool, right? If you're not data sharing, you don't care. But if you are data sharing, you can get away from registering the pages, which means that DB2 that's running the run stats and unload won't be going out to the coupling facility, nor will you be driving the coupling facility busy during those operations. So there's a bunch of enhancements there. Call group statistics are more efficient, right? 25% CPU reduction up to 15% elapsed time reduction. We're going to do better things with compressed data. We're going to keep track of the compress ratio so that utilities do a better job of calculating the size of sort work that they need to run, right? So they need to know what the compress ratio is as they're doing this. Anybody using flash copy? Couple hands, okay. So there's a lot of enhancements of version 12 for flash copy. So we can support multiple copy pools for system level backups, and we're doing a lot with the flash copies for reorgs and template support, whether it's specifying management class or storage class. So there's a number of enhancements where we're going to get, better use out of this. And those of you who aren't using flash copy should really look at it. There was a time when flash copy was only on IBM disk, but as far as I know, all the major disk vendors have bought the license to flash copy, and they can do that now too. And another piece about utilities is we're trying to reduce or eliminate the application impact. So for example, if you're using sequences or identity columns and keeping track of the max assigned value, now the load utility will respect that and make updates to it so you don't have to worry about it. There's an online load replace. So if you have a reference table and you want to refresh the data in the reference table, the application can keep accessing the table while you build the new copy. And then you just do a switch, right? So it's the same shadow technology we use for online reorg. Just build the new reference table, and then at some point when there's nobody accessing it or hardly anybody, then you do a quick switch, and now they're accessing the new data. Run stats. You can actually run stats and say invalidate cache to invalidate the cache, right? Which makes more sense than saying run stats report none, update none, report no. So, and if you don't say invalidate cache, then it won't. That's nice. And then there were some, like I said before, there were some restrictions relative to PBGs from previous releases that we've lifted. So again, there were some hands for data sharing, right? Bunch of data sharing improvements. The one that I'm most excited about, and I can't wait to talk to you about if you fall into this one, is asynchronous CF duplexing. So for those of you doing data sharing, you know that what I really want is I have my footprints and my LPARs and my DB2s, and I have a lock structure and an SCA, and I want them on a coupling facility that is not on the same footprint with my DB2s and IRLMs, right? So I can avoid hardware outages. But some shops have said, well, I only have 2 boxes, and so my lock and SCA are going to be on the box with my DB2 and IRLM. So now that's a single point of failure, right? If I lose that box, never happens, I know, but let me tell you stories. But if I lose that box and I lose the lock structure and the IRLM, then I lose this DB2 also. That's not good. So we've had something called system managed duplexing for quite some time, which says I have a copy lock structure here and a copy lock structure here, but that's very expensive. So there are customers who won't do that because it's too expensive, and so they're exposed, and other customers who are doing it, and it's expensive. So in version 12, we have asynchronous CF lock duplexing, which says I can duplex the lock structure, but it's a lot less expensive. Instead of being 4x CPU per message, it's going to be like 1.0001 or something like that. It's a small number, like from 4 mics to 4.13 mics or something like that. To find out all about that, you'd have to be listening to Mark Brooks right now instead of me, because he's on at the same time, but you can read his material. So DB2 is going to support this in version 12, right? With the appropriate coupling facility control code and with the appropriate enhancements to ZOS 2.2 or to 2.3. And I'm very excited about this. If you're in the situation where you have your data sharing, you have 2 footprints, and you don't have 2 lock structures, talk to me, and we'll talk about how to make this work. We also have a bunch of performance improvements for data sharing. Lock avoidance has been sort of an issue ever since data sharing came out in version 4, because we only kept track of one value that we did all of our lock avoidance checking against, and so that drove additional locks and therefore additional CF activity, and we've enhanced that significantly. The in-memory indexes I talked about before probably means we're going to do fewer get pages and potentially fewer accesses to the coupling facility. The improved space search algorithm says we're not going to be pounding on the space map page. When you pound on the space map page, you're potentially doing page p-locks, so we can reduce that. And I already mentioned the run stats and unload can avoid registering pages. As data sharing is my favorite topic, I could go on for hours. I don't have that kind of time. But I always tell the shops I work with who do data sharing, please automate the restart of your DB2. If you lose your LPAR or you lose your box, automate the restart of that DB2 somewhere, anywhere, to release retained locks really quickly. Otherwise, very, very bad things happen. I've got lots of war stories. Some shops still won't automate restarting DB2 on another LPAR or another box if they lose that LPAR. They say either, I'm going to wait for the LPAR to come up, or they say, oh, I'll restart it, but I'm going to type the command in once I decide where it's supposed to go. Right? All of these things just elongate the application outage. So I want it automated. Ideally, I want it in the automatic restart manager, or you can use your favorite automation tool. That works fine. But in version 12, we give the DB2 person a way to sneak a zparm in to do peer recovery. So if my partner DB2 disappears because its LPAR disappeared, my DB2 will issue the start light for that DB2, and it'll start light right here. And if I have 6 DB2s in my data share environment and I lose one of them, the 5 of them are all going to try and restart it, and whoever gets there first wins. Now, is this the greatest solution? No, I still want automatic restart manager. That's much better. But it's better than nothing. It's better than having a manual process. And then finally, we've had automatic recovery from logical page list and group buffer pool recover pending for many releases of DB2. But even then, sometimes, especially in a group restart, especially in a DR kind of situation, it doesn't clean all of them up. And so then some lucky DBA gets to type start database tablespace for all of the ones that have LPL, or do a bunch of asterisks, and then it's a single task doing it. So it's just irritating. So DB2 is going to issue a retry on its own, right, up to 3 times for each object. And there's a new message that comes out that tells you if there's anything left in grep or LPL. All right, so I want to migrate to version 12. What do I need? You need to at least be on a Z196. I hope everybody's at least on a Z196, right? Now, the hardware folks that are in all the other rooms want you to be on Z14s, right? But if you're on a Z196 related, we can do this. You need to be at least ZOS 2.1. I don't even remember if it's still supported. I know 2.2 has been out and 2.3 is out. Is anybody not yet on 2.1? Okay, good. And then the rest of these things all come with 2.1. And then there's a new IRLM because that's going to support the asynchronous CF duplexing. It ships with DB2, so it'll come in as part of the migration. So the migration is going to be different, right? There's no enable new function mode. Instead, we're going to get to the way to enabling the new SQL by issuing a command called activate function level. You can type it in, or if you want to have all of your migrations be job stream that someone can go audit later, there's a new job, DSNT-IJAF, that says activate function, to put the activate function level. So this is different. In version 8, 9, and 10, we had conversion mode that included a cat mate, and then we went to enable new function mode, which was in effect another cat mate before we did new function mode, right? And so those were 2 disruptive events, and people had to have 2 sets of change requests and all of change windows and backup and all that kind of stuff. So we're just doing it once, right? You migrate to version 12, you point to the libraries, you run cat mate, there you are. But where you are isn't going to use the new SQL like merge. Where you are at that point is someplace that can still fall back to version 11. Once you're comfortable that you don't have to fall back to version 11, then you activate function level v12 r1 m500, and that says, I'm never going back to 11. I want to enable all the new SQL. It's a group-wide event, and once you're there, now you can have everything. And that'll be the point from which we'll start delivering continuous delivery. Another point behind this is Apple Compat is going to be used for a lot more in version 12 than it was in 11, right? Apple Compat in 11 just said, take the migration of my applications that might have been doing something that's affected by an incompatibility and separate that application migration from my subsystem migration. So I can migrate to version 11 and let my application still use version 10 SQL code, right? So we're still going to do that. But in addition, we're going to have Apple Compat decide when you get to use new functions. So your packages will have to be bound with Apple Compat v12 r1 m500 to use merge, for example, the new merge. In version 11, we said you are allowed to convert your bootstrap. In version 12, you have to have already converted your bootstrap, right? If you're in data sharing, you can convert the bootstrap and not worry about the rest of it. Right? Eventually you'll want to convert the rest of them, but there's no rush. If you're not in data sharing, think carefully about this, because as soon as you convert the bootstrap, you consume your RBA faster, right? Because all of those log records are 10 bytes, and they're going to consume RBA faster. And you may want to convert your catalog directory and your user objects before you convert your bootstrap if you're non-data sharing. There's a nice white paper out about that from Gareth Jones and John Campbell and company. Rebind your packages. Anything that wasn't bound prior to version 10 won't work. You'll end up with auto rebinds and perhaps other problems. So we want to get this all cleaned up. You can't do basic row format anymore. We're not going to, you're still going to be able to read them, but you can't set the zparm, and you can't put it in the reorg, and somewhere in the future, you're not going to have objects that are in basic row format. And then finally, we're providing support for a temporal support for your real-time statistics, right? So we can keep track of history on them. You don't have to use that, but the catalog is set up to do it. So version 12 is the base for continuous delivery. Has anyone been to or heard about continuous delivery at somewhere? Did anyone go listen to John Lyle earlier this week? Okay. Great job, great stuff. I shamelessly stole his material. I'm sorry, I intelligently reused his material for other venues because it's really nice and clear. But the key here is we're not going to do modes anymore, right? We're doing v12 r1 m100, v12 r1 m500, v12 r1 m501. And all of us are going to shorten it to say M100 and M500 because all the rest of that's just a lot of, but you know it's all there. You have to type all those letters, right? You can say M500, but you have to type the rest. So when we come out with new function, right, when you activate function level v12r1 m500, that's when all that new SQL that I talked about on previous pages is going to be available, right? So whether it's the new merge support or whether the new SQL procedural language support, all that, the packages have to be bound with v12r1 m500. In addition, in version 12, DCL and DDL, right? Grant, revoke, and create, alter, all of those things are going to be controlled by Apple Compat. So if you're a DBA and you want to issue one of the new DDL statements like insert partition, the package in which you insert it has to be bound v12r1 m500. Right? So if your favorite package is spoofy, you're going to have to bind your spoofy package with Apple Compat v12r1 m500 for you to issue that. Right? We never controlled DCL or DDL this way before. It was always based on NewFun in HDEC-P. Right? Now we're going to do that with Apple Compat. Going forward, new features and functions are showing up in the maintenance stream. This sounds like a radical departure, right? Oh my goodness, you're giving us new function in the maintenance stream? Well, we've been doing that all along, right? Anyone remember when Java first came out? New function was coming out with Java every time you turned around. Version 11 added so much new function for utilities that Håkon Roberts had a 1-hour presentation about the stuff that's new after version 11 GA, right? So we've been introducing new function in different parts of the products. We're just doing it for the entire product going forward. And so you're going to put your maintenance on like you always did. And the new function is going to sit there, right? It'll be there in SDSN load waiting for you to use it. And once all of the members of your data sharing group have the right maintenance and you get the enabling PTF, then you can say activate function activate function level V12R1 M501, and now you can use listag, assuming that the package that's going to use listag is bound with applicant V12R1 M501, right? It's going to correspond. Was there a question?
Yeah, new DB2, Apple Compat in the past has gone back 2 releases through?
So the question is, how far back does Apple Compat go? So application compatibility was introduced in version 11 and would tolerate settings for V10R1 for version 10 and V11R1 for version 11. And we aren't changing how far back it goes. So it's still, you can still set V10R1 or V11R1 for your package. You can also set V12R1 M100 if you really want to, or M500, M501, M502 once your system is there. If your system is at M500, you cannot set Apple Compat to M501. That'll break.
Sure.
Right, but we have not announced when we're going to stop supporting Apple Compat V10R1. Right, so far you can still run DB2 code on a version 10 path if that package is bound Apple Compat V10R1.
So moving forward, will Apple Compat be backward compatible based on release or these maintenance streams? Like, for example, 505, will it go back compatibility to maintenance streams or releases?
Okay, so the question is, as we go forward, how's application compatibility going to do relative to backward compatibility? So what application compatibility says is, what level of DB2 code path am I allowed to run? So if my package is bound V12R1 M505, then that package can execute all the SQL that's delivered at M505, and it can also execute M504 and M503 and so on and so forth. If you have another package that's bound M501, it can only execute M501 or version 11 or version 10, right? But if you have a specific piece of SQL like the merge statement, right? You run the merge statement in a package bound with M500 and you spell it right? And if you do the merge syntax correctly, you're going to use the new enhanced merge in version 12. If your package is bound V11R1 and you do merge, you'll either get the old merge or you try to spell it like the new merge and it won't work, right? So you're going to be restricted, but it's a going forward thing. So I can have 27 packages, 10 of them bound at M505 and 10 of them at M504 and, however many I have left bound at V10R1, and they can still run in the same DB2. They'll just be doing different things. All right, good question. Okay, so we're going to keep applying maintenance, and when we're ready, we're going to activate the new function level. And once we've activated the new function level, then our programmers can use the new SQL in a package bound with that the corresponding Apple Compat level, right? So M501 delivered listag, and you can use that if your package says M501. And M502 came out this past April, and it has support for transparent data set encryption, as well as for some casting and some other continuous delivery enhancements. And to use the specific features that came in M502 for transparent data set encryption, you have to have your packages bound with Apple Compat V12R1 M502, and your DB2 system or your DB2 data sharing group has to be at function level V12R1 M502. Now, Gayatri Chandran is going to talk about transparent data set encryption tomorrow, I believe. So you can go listen to all the details about that. Continuous delivery is non-obvious to the casual observer, right? I've been wrestling with it since halfway through the version 12 ESP program. I didn't write it, right? So I had to learn from the people who wrote it and figure out what it is that they're doing. And it's taken a while. And now I'm reasonably comfortable. And I'm reasonably able to answer all the questions that pop up. But if you're new to it, or this is the first time you've heard someone talk about it, there's a couple resources here. There's a YouTube about it, and there's a red piece that Chris Cohn wrote. He actually wrote it when M501 was around and M502 wasn't around yet, but he has examples, descriptions of how it'll work for M502 and going forward. So check those out if you want more details on that, and otherwise, of course, give me a shout or give John Lyle a shout, and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Okay, so some of you said you already had plans for 12, and some of you haven't. So going forward, what can you do? Well, one thing we can do is you can have me or one of my colleagues come out and talk to you for what we're calling a technology workshop. It's similar to the migration planning workshop from past releases, a little bit different. And that's going to introduce the new features and functions, so it's going to take this that we talked about today and either spread it over a whole day, or depending on who it is, we can even spread it over 2 days if we wanted to get into that kind of detail. Sometimes we do it at a venue like in a town, and then we invite everybody from that town to come up, and we get a whole bunch of different customers, or we can do a one-on-one with a customer, and sometimes that means digging into your specific problems that you don't want anybody else to hear about, right? So we can do those. Scheduling is going to be challenging, right, because there's only a few of us that do this, but we can do that. And on top of that, lab services has folks that have been working with 12 already, and they're happy to work with you, either on laying out a migration plan, or on helping you with some of the details, or on doing the migration, or on coming in afterwards to help you troubleshoot problems, whatever it is, right, whatever piece, because most of us have fewer sets of arms and legs doing the stuff that my team used to be 6 people a few years ago, right? Now I'm one with some new people being trained. So some of you are in a similar position. These guys can come help. No, they're not free. There's a bunch more information here, lots of links. Most of these I've checked out and they actually work. But I was so busy cutting and pasting, I didn't check all of them, but I'm pretty sure they're going to get you to the right place. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations. I forgot how far we got yesterday, but it was well over 2,000 that I heard them announce. There was enough static I didn't hear the final digits, so please fill out your evaluations. So to wrap it up, in version 12, we're extending the core of what DB2 has been known for years. We're enabling modern applications, and we're the springboard or the launch pad, whatever metaphor you want, for continuous delivery, so that going forward, we're not going to have frequent, every 3-year, functions. We're getting the functions out to you quicker, and so you can use them faster. And if you think of questions after this, shoot me an email. Thanks for your attention.